Welcome back to Power Play. Nikki Haley is out. Donald Trump is in. Haley officially dropped out of the race this morning after losing all but one state in Super Tuesday primaries. What does round two of a Trump-Biden matchup mean for Canada? Let's bring in the front bench. With us tonight, Saeed Selvam is the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Former Alberta MLA and Cabinet Minister Gary Marr is with us. He's the President and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. Kathleen Monk is the former Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And next to her, that's Marika Walsh. She's a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Hey good to see you. I mean, I think, Kathleen, we had thought this was definitely an eventuality, but now it's here. Donald Trump is the GOP nominee. What do you draw from the formality of that news?
Well, it was interesting. It was interesting to see how quickly the Republicans fell in line with Mitch McConnell's endorsement, somebody who hasn't spoken to Mr. Trump in 3.5 years, and everybody else, because they are backing the nominee, the assumed nominee. But I was more interested in what Nikki Haley did today, because she didn't endorse Trump, but it seems obvious she will in a few weeks, to me at least, that she will endorse him. But where do her voters go? So what I was watching for was what the Democrats did today, and they immediately pounced on her supporters and said, Trump has already said he doesn't want you in his camp. And they're like, we have room for you in our campaign. And they were courting those independents, some of those Republican moderates that have already said very clearly they're not going to vote for Trump. So that's kind of where a bit of the play is. You know, will Biden be able to kind of grab some of Nikki Haley's votes? Who knows?
Saeed, how crucial do you think that will be? Essentially, I mean, Nikki Haley was able to get, even in some of the more, like her worst case scenarios, around 30% of the Republican primary vote. How much of that do you anticipate goes to Trump, particularly if she does do what Kathleen says and in a couple of weeks endorses him, or is there a chance that some of them do go Biden's way?
I think for the most part, a lot of these voters are going to go the way of Trump, or maybe even not voting at all. And I think that's the issue. A lot of people, especially voters that feel that they don't have a choice or they're caught between a rock and a hard place, are not necessarily going to vote if they don't feel that they have a candidate that they can get behind. So I don't see it as being extremely likely that people will go to Biden's side, even though the DNC is trying to recruit them. I think that for the most part, they'll either stay on the sidelines or they'll go the Trump route. And again, this is just an alignment of values and views. And if they don't feel that they can get behind Trump, then at the end of the day, their best option is to stay home, unfortunately. And we've seen this in previous campaigns, in previous US elections. We've seen this in Canadian elections as well. When voters do not feel like they have a solid candidate, unfortunately, they tend to stay home.
Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into what Canada does over the next number of months, Gary, Joe Biden himself as well, because part of the story here is questions around his own kind of presentation, his age, to be more specific, the way in which he communicates. There's going to be a big test for him, or opportunity, depending on the way you look at it. Tomorrow is Thursday, for the State of the Union. How significant do you think a moment in this presidential race it will be for him?
Well, there's a number of things that are to the advantage of President Biden. One, he's an incumbent, and most of the time, presidential incumbents succeed, Mr. Trump being an exception in 2020. Number two, the economy is going pretty good in the United States. That should be an advantage to the incumbent President Biden. Number three, he's got a really great team behind him. And, I would expect people like David Axelrod are going to be coming out to really work on the campaign and develop the policy. But the downside for Mr. Biden is that there's a perception that he's not, physically strong enough to hold the job of the commander-in-chief. And that's a real problem. So how he comes out in the State of the Union address is going to be critically important. He doesn't have to do that every day, but this is one that he's really got to hit it out of the ballpark. Now, he's going to name a number of things that he wants to accomplish between now and the general election. Because there's a divided House, it's unlikely that the Republicans will allow any of the major initiatives that he outlines in the State of the Union address. They're not going to let him have it because they don't want to give the advantage to him before a presidential election. So for Mr. Trump, the polls show him ahead. But on the other hand, he faces criminal trials that start this month. We'll have to see how that all pans out, whether that changes the minds of the voting public or not. So there's still lots of things to be determined between now and an election held in November of 2024.
Marika, as far as the State of the Union goes, I've read some interesting reporting on the people, based on conversations with the people around Joe Biden who are worried about Thursday night, particularly because when he does seem to punch through and kind of counter the narrative around his age, it's when it's in the more unscripted moments versus when he has to read off the prompter. He does have like a stutter, an issue with speech that seems to be exacerbated when he's forced to read off a teleprompter. How significant do you think a moment tomorrow night will be for him?
I think it's all the more significant because of the past missteps, that special counsel report that essentially dismissed him as an old man with bad memory problems. I think that the context of that and the response to that and how negative that reaction was, and also how personally Biden tried to respond to that and how it flopped, I think increases the expectations and sort of the stakes for the State of the Union. I think he has really struggled to figure out a way to sell voters on his age and in a way own it that makes it less of an issue. And right now it just is the thing that seems to be a barrier before people can see anything else that he does or anything else that he has accomplished. And, maybe he will have a response to that as part of the State of the Union. I think that's something that people like David Axelrod, who Gary just mentioned, have been very critical of and have said that he needs to do a much better job on.
Okay, let's talk about Canada, Kathleen, and the number of months, as Gary mentioned, in between now and election day. A lot of stuff can happen. Frank McKenna, if I'm going to paraphrase what he said, was in essence, saying to the federal government, don't lecture the United States during this time. Just kind of build up your arsenal so you have a case to make whomever ends up winning the election. How do you expect the feds to navigate the next few months?
I think carefully. I think they have backed off what we saw in November, December, kind of their more direct linking of Pierre Poilievre to MAGA and kind of denouncing the MAGA movement. They've realized that that's not going to play, especially if Mr. Trump becomes the president. So they're going to be pretty careful. I think that that's wise for now, but I think that some of the policies that they could, they can attack the policies of the right, just like they can champion, frankly, the policies of Mr. Biden. Not only his investments in clean energy and basically the decarboned economy, but also the announcement he just made yesterday, or maybe it was Monday, excuse me, where he's actually putting a cap on credit card fees. These kind of things that really help Canadians, or could help Canadians if they brought championing these kind of Biden-like policies here in Canada. We actually tried to say, what is an affordability thing that we could do for Canadians? One thing is capping those fees so those expenses don't hurt the average Canadian.
Do you think, Saeed, there's a delicate way of criticizing policies on the MAGA right and endorsing Biden policies domestically here in Canada, or is it fraught with kind of political landmines for the feds?
I think there are a lot of political landmines for the feds, and I think that they can definitely use the ability to avoid landmines, especially given the press that's happened within the past few weeks. The federal government, especially here for the next few months, whether it's a Biden government, whether it's a Trump government next year, this government really needs to start focusing on how to continue enhancing brand and really making sure that there are no other political missteps nationally and domestically here at home. And I think that's one of the big challenges, is that there's so much going on here, especially around ArriveCan and things like that, that they need to really focus on building up their good news stories. And even if a Trump presidency or Trump administration occurs next year, they need to do their best to not offend that administration, because that administration has already said they want to focus on U.S. protectionist policies. They want to make sure that it's America first. And I think that if they start to irritate that government or a potential government down the road, they're going to have a lot of challenges when it comes to that cross-border diplomacy.
Gary, I just have a few seconds left, and all of that is very true. But at the same time, the most success politically the Liberals have had in the last 8 to 10 months is the 2 weeks before Christmas, when they went the hardest at Pierre Poilievre and the Tories in drawing the comparisons with Trump and MAGA Republicans.
That may be true politically, but I think it's quite important that, as Saeed says, and as Ambassador McKenna said, you can't antagonize the United States. You cannot, sort of lecture to them about what they should do. So I agree with all of the commentary that says we have to be prepared regardless of who's in the White House, and not antagonize a Trump administration or a Biden administration, both of whom, have a certain amount of America First policies. They're titled differently, but we need to keep in mind that the review of the USMCA comes up in 2026. This is the most critically important trade agreement that we have, and we need to be prepared regardless of who is in the presidency, Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden.